be talking to you today about this book, Traction, by Gino Wickman. And so what it's about is how to get a grip on your business. We hear quite frequently common frustrations in business are that people feel like they have a lack of control over their business, that the people in their business, either clients or employees, they don't feel like are on the same page, that there's not profit, that there's a ceiling that you hit, that I've grown to a certain point and I can't seem to get past it. Or just number 5, plain old, nothing's working. I feel like I've tried all these things and I'm still stuck. And this is not just the horse industry. This is across any industry that you will hear these really common frustrations in business. So in the horse industry, what are some examples of this? I can tell you that what I hear pretty frequently is that, my students or my clients or my boarders call or text me at all hours. I had one client who told me my boarders installed a wall in the barn without asking and cut the locks off of my tackroom doors. I don't know what my kind of insert position here, stall cleaner, instructor, assistant is doing. She sits in her car until this time, or it takes somebody 3 hours to do something that it takes me 1 hour to do. I'm bringing money in, but I don't know where it's going. Why aren't I profitable? I don't know how to grow, or I want to spend time with my family or show my own horse or go on vacation, but I'm at the barn all day, every day. Any of that sound familiar? Yeah? Okay. So the idea here is that we're going to figure out a strategy, a system. That's what this book is all about, for being able to move through some of those challenges. Because you're not alone in that. Everybody's going to encounter those at one point or another. So what do we have to do in order to be ready for growth? Okay, not making eye contact here because I don't want anyone to feel called out. So we need to be growth oriented. We need to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to change, willing to admit that there's weaknesses in your business, and we need to be willing to face reality, right? Sometimes we'll work with folks who sign up for a coaching program and then they don't want to change anything. That's not going to help, right? It's great. We love talking with you. But if we're not going to implement changes, there's no reason for you to be working with us. So this book is centered around 6 key components of your business. And we're going to kind of go through those today. And maybe what are some different strategies? How can we look at these pieces a little bit differently to gain some traction in our business? So those pieces are your vision for your business, where you're going, the people in your business. Do you have the right people in the right seats? This one, I wish I could highlight and throw confetti around. Data. We have to have measurables. We have to have numbers so that we can make decisions based on data and not emotion. Issues. We have to know what the issues in our business are, whether brought up by staff members, whether brought up by clients, by students, and we have to have a way to be able to solve them and work through them. Process is there needs to be consistency throughout all the different things that you do in your business, whether it's HR and whether it's a way that we're hiring people, whether it's the way we're cleaning a stall, whether it's the way we're teaching a lesson. There needs to be consistency. I can't do this differently than Brian would do this, or it's not going to lead to a strong business. And then finally, actually gaining some traction in your business. We're going to use tools like rocks and like having a strong meeting cadence. So we'll get to what those mean in a little bit. So you want to see your business grow, but you're scared to let go of where you are now. super, super common. Humans don't really like change very much. And so there's 3 choices about anytime something's being brought up to you in this manner, right? You can live with it, you can leave it, or you can change it. And it's up to you to decide which of those you want to take advantage of. Everybody's here, so I think it's a pretty safe bet that everybody in this room probably wants to change, probably wants to grow. So I'm excited that we've got the right people in the room, at least here today. And so 4 things really need to be in place in order to be ready to change. You need to build and maintain a leadership team, and that may look very different depending on what stage you are in your business. Hitting a ceiling is pretty much inevitable. You can only run your business on one operating system, meaning that we need to have that consistency across the board in the way that we are doing things, consistency in our processes. And you need to be open-minded, vulnerable, and growth-oriented. So I can tell you across the board, everybody who I've worked with, I think Brian feels the same way. Tina probably feels the same way on her end. People who are willing to try things and see what works get far, far better results than people who are slow to implement. It might not be perfect the first time around, but as long as it's a decision that you can make changes around, better to try it than not try it, even if it's not something you're going to keep long term. So building your leadership team. So I want to take a minute here and decide and talk about your decision about what kind of leadership structure you want to have in your business. And so the first thing you have to decide, is it going to be a dictatorship, or are you going to have a team in place? And sometimes people laugh when I say, is it going to be a dictatorship? But that can work. There is nothing wrong with that. And I wanna just give you the example that jumped into my mind. Most of you aren't from the West Coast, a couple of you are, but the example that jumped to mind was the Desert International Horse Park. They run a really big series of shows down there, thermal. So for a long time, it was managed by a show management company, and they always did pretty well. People go to those shows. It's the winter circuit. It's big. It's kind of where if you want to show during the winter on the West Coast, that's pretty much where you end up. But there was always kind of rumblings, and people weren't happy with this or that, or, the horse show, right? But a few years ago, the management team changed, and Steve Hankins and his partners took it over. And Steve acted as CEO. And he has grown it into really a top-notch show, in my opinion. He's been able to attract significant corporate sponsorship. Riders from the East Coast are now coming to the West Coast for some of these shows that he's having. Riders from Europe are coming for the circuit. There's a ton of prize money. Really, really just a high level of competition. And it's everything from walk trot up through your FEI classes, Grand Prix classes. And so one of the reasons this partnership jumped to mind is because now it's dissolving, Steve's moving on. But in the article that they put out about it, the team, the board, is not installing a new CEO in Steve's position. And it was because he wore every single hat. Every single decision that the company went through him. And so think about that for a minute. If that is hiring everybody from the parking attendants to the groundskeepers to your jump crew judges, hospitality, vendors, footing, everything crossed his desk. And he did it very successfully. But think about if that's the work-life balance you want. right? So if that's what you want, if you don't want to surrender, he wanted that level of control to be able to turn this circuit, to be able to turn the horse park into this kind of destination that it now is. And he felt like that was what he needed to do in order to make that happen. He made every single decision. And so it worked. It's very successful. He knows every inch of that horse park. I've been down there a couple of times. I cannot say enough good things. Every single person working there, from the parking attendants to the office staff, is absolutely phenomenal, friendly. I have never encountered a higher level of customer service at a horse show. They had a big problem in 2022 with EHV1, and they turned it into a real strength. As far as I know, they're the only showgrounds that has a dedicated veterinarian on site. So they've really been able to turn these weaknesses into a strength. But I want you to think about what you want, right? If you want this kind of dictatorship and to have that level of control, that can work. But you're going to have responsibility for all things and all people. You really don't have the ability then to step back, to take a break, to delegate some decision making, to put less of yourself into the day-to-day. And that's why most companies, why most businesses are run as a team, right? You look at most of the major corporations, think about Microsoft, Adobe, Nvidia. Those are all team-run organizations, and they're very, very successful. And I would encourage you, one of the things I hear most commonly on coaching calls is, I don't want to be in my business every day, all day, right? And so if that's the goal, we've got to get a team in place at some point. So building your leadership team, what does this look like for a riding school? A lot of you are still going to be flying solo, and that's okay. But I want you to have this in the back of your mind. Who are going to be your departmental heads, right? Who is going to be responsible for the different areas in which we're making decisions? So you want to select the best people that you can. Ideally, every single department head is going to be better than you are at their job, at their function. So, you want your head lesson instructor to know the ins and outs of the curriculum and teach a great lesson. You want your stable manager to know all the horses, maybe be handier than you with some power tools. And I think a lot of you have already experienced this in the admin side of things. If you have a virtual assistant, a lot of you have already seen that that person is going to be better than you at booking lessons and getting people on the calendar. So that's the goal. And so for a leadership team in a riding school, it can look different, depending on the size of your school and where you are in this process. You might have that riding school director, you might have that barn manager or assistant, you might have a communications director or office assistant, you might have a position I'm not thinking about right now, but you want to make sure that you get the right people on your team. And so moving on to vision. So what this book says is that everyone in your organization should be able to answer these 8 questions in the same way. And I'm not putting this up here to scare you because I don't know that I could do this. Good thing Brian's not here right now. But I don't know that we could do this. But this should be the goal, right? That the part-time instructor can respond to this and know what's the goal of the business in 3 years. The main gist is that everyone should be on the same page and understand that direction that you're moving, understand the goals for the company, and understand the priorities. That's another important one. That what's most important and what do we want to get done. So most entrepreneurs assume that everybody knows their vision and can see their vision too. That's not the reality. Your staff is not going to know what your vision is unless you communicate it to them. And so what we want to do is make sure that we come up with some values to steer the ship. This book suggests that you do that with your leadership team at an off-campus retreat so that you're really out of things while you're thinking about how you're going to do this. And so here's some example riding school values that we can kind of go through, and I'm interested on your thoughts on this too. But so safety, you might say, riding horses is a dangerous activity, and we go above and beyond to make sure we do our absolute best to provide a safe environment and teach our students safe practices. Horse welfare, we will always prioritize our horses' health and welfare as they are half the team at the riding school. Fun, you learn better when you're enjoying yourself, so we utilize games and other activities to make sure our students look forward to their lessons. Progress, our curriculum-based program helps riders measure their progress through tangible methods and keeps them looking forward to the next challenge. And camaraderie, we believe that every rider has something to learn and something to contribute. We foster a supportive and inclusive environment. How do those sound for our riding school values? Pretty good? Good. So it doesn't have to be this list. This is just an example, but this is something that you might utilize in your riding school for your values, or it might be a jumping off point. There's things that aren't on here. You might put profit on here, right? That wouldn't be wrong. You might put teamwork. You might put, communication. There's lots of other things that could be included. But what you want to do as a team is really figure out what's your school's vision, what's going to work best for you, and then run with it and let it marinate and make sure that you have the right values for your program. So I'm going to kind of skip through how to nail down your values, how to nail down your core focus. It can sometimes help you crystallize who you want to be in the field a little bit doing these exercises, but same thing, 10-year target. Everybody should have a 10-year target. We want to have a goal where we're steering the organization, but in my opinion, it's not that useful day to day because it's too far out. It's too far out of a timeline for you to really be able to make too many decisions based on your 10-year target. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about marketing strategy. And this is very broad. This isn't how am I going to run my Facebook ads. So by marketing strategy, what I mean is how are you going to find that niche and succeed in that niche for your business? So one thing is to make sure that you have your focus, that you know what your focus is, because realistically, we can't be all things to all people. Sometimes, especially when people are getting started, I hear, well, my background's English, but everybody wants Western lessons, so I'm going to get a Western saddle and I'll learn that. Or there's a lot of people in my area who've been asking about therapeutic lessons. Do you know how I go get certified? But it's not realistic in most cases for you to run an English program, maybe run a training program on top of that, have Western lessons, have therapeutic lessons, at least not initially. Maybe we grow to that at some point, but we really want to make sure that we have our spot and we succeed in that spot with kind of that singular focus and drive. So your marketing strategy should be made up of 4 pieces. So your market, or sometimes your list, These should be your ideal customers, and so that means geographically, demographically, and psychographically. Anybody know what psychographically means? I had to look it up. Yeah. Yeah, so psychographics are somebody's beliefs or values. So, what is it that your ideal customer really values, and how are you going to target that, right? How are you gonna pull that out? Your three uniques. We've talked about this a little bit at past conferences, I remember. But so it's basically what three pieces make you unique from your competitors, especially if you're in an area where there's a riding school on every corner, which I know some of you are. What is it that differentiates you? You know, what's your value proposition as to why your method is different or better than some of the other methods out there? What's your proven process? They really suggest that you capture this in a visual way. And then having a guarantee could also be called a pledge, commitment, promise, fill in the blank, may or may not be suitable for all businesses. But it's an opportunity for you to pinpoint an industry problem and solve it. So, you know, what are the biggest frustrations or fears of your consumers, and back it up with a penalty to yourself if you don't deliver on that. So the market, your list. So this is really figuring out how to pinpoint your ideal customers. And so this is a list of often the types of people who we will try to target on Facebook ads. So parents or grandparents, right? People looking for activities for their kids, people who like horses, people who love animals, people who enjoy outdoor activities, usually within roughly 25 miles of you. I know there's some areas where it's like, oh, people aren't driving more than 10 miles. And then some of my friends in Texas are like, they'll drive 50. Can we make it bigger? So, you know, you've got to know your area and know what's realistic to expect people geographically to drive to you. They need to be wealthy enough to be able to afford to ride horses most of the time, unless you have a grant or a nonprofit arm set up that can help support that. The families need to believe in supporting their children's love of animals. It may be an adult or it may be a child wanting to connect with an animal. Sometimes it's kids or adults who are really looking for that social aspect and looking to be able to make friends at the barn. Getting off a screen. I don't see any laptops, thanks guys. So getting off a screen, and people really looking to increase confidence, patience, self-esteem through the vehicle of participating with horses, participating with horseback riding. So your three uniques, I didn't go too far into this because this really is going to be something that's unique to you and your barn. But some of the things you may want to consider might be the fact that you use a curriculum. That is still very uncommon. Most riding schools don't do it. It may be your values that you went through and worked out with your team. It might be your qualifications. Maybe you have some great certifications. That's very uncommon, again, for most of today's riding instructors to have. You may know that you have the best lesson horses or the best instructors in the area. That can make a huge difference. You may be really passionate about what you do, and that can definitely differentiate you from, you know, the cranky old lady on the corner who I think we've all had lessons from at some point or other. Maybe you really offer your clients a boutique experience that's above and beyond what, you know, the mill on the corner is just shoving people through every hour. Maybe you offer your students an opportunity to horse show and go to horse shows without having to own a horse. That's something that's not super common in most places, and for a good reason. But so it can really be anything, but I think it is a good exercise for you to sit down by yourself or with your leadership team and think about what is it that really makes me special, and then, pull that into your marketing strategy. Explain to that prospective client, yes, you can go here and get a lesson cheaper, or, whatever the case may be. But the analogy I use a lot is, it's not all about price. Every time you want a steak, you're not going to go to Sizzler, right? And I think that that's important. Quality and price are often linked in the consumer's mind, and so I don't think that pricing yourself the cheapest necessarily does you any favors. And so your proven process. So this is pretty broad here. If you do this exercise for your riding school, you probably want to get a little more nitty-gritty than this. But so just moving along from your intro lesson where you're learning safety and independence and communication, the client stepping up into a commitment to ride and really become a true horse person. Maybe they're riding once or twice a week and making that commitment. To really deciding, this is my sport, this is what I want to focus on. I'm going to choose horses and riding over other activities at this point, right? How many times do we hear, oh, I need to move my lesson, I'm playing volleyball. Oh, I need to move my lesson, my whatever, I've got this other activity going on. But at this point, they've made their decision and they're going to prioritize horses. And then finally, what I call all in is making all my decisions around horses. What will help me be a better person for my horse, right? This is the kind of your true barn rat stage or true all in stage where, this is a part of me, this is what I'm doing. And then, so marketing strategy continued. Your guarantee or your pledge or your commitment, what I came up with was, if a student is engaged, positive, and excited to ride, I will teach them to be a successful rider and an even better horse person. And I'm not sure I love that, so I plugged that prompt into ChatGPT, and oh my gosh, do they really throw out a lot of options. So everything from, making consistent progress. You'll see measurable improvement in your riding within 90 days, or your next month of lessons is free. You could definitely do something like that. If your student comes consistently and they're brand new, tell me that in 90 days they're not going to be able to see progress, right? It sounds scary, but I bet every single one of you could make that commitment. You might really center your pledge or your guarantee around coaching or communications. You might say something like, there's no cookie cutter lessons. Every session is tailored to you, your individual goals, and your learning style. You might make a promise around your horses or your instructors, that you'll be taught by experienced, credentialed instructors who actually train and compete. So you're always learning current and proven methods. Accountability. Anyway, there's a ton. If you're interested in being able to make a guarantee to your clients, there's definitely ways to do that, and I think it's an interesting thing to explore. So creating a proven process again. So you want to illustrate what the steps are, give each one a name, and those are really going to be the touch points with your clients. So you want to have 3 or 5 talking points under them, and that's for your sales team, right? That's for your sales team to explain why each of these touch points are important. And you can name it, our proven process, or the blank difference are really common ones. And then give it to a graphic designer and print it, hand it out, right? this was a PowerPoint template. You could put a little more thought into it than I did here. But you get the idea. It's something that you can hand to your client so they can really see how they're going to move through your program. So, for example, this might be someone who walks in your door and says, hey, I want to go to the Olympics. How do we do that, right? So, okay, let's have a lesson. Do you want to do this? Yep, let's do it. Let's get better. Okay, we're going to get into multiple rides. We're going to start showing maybe local or IEA shows. We're moving into leasing or ownership. We're doing local or regional shows. There may be some annual goals surrounding divisions, points, year-end championships. And then finally, really traveling to shows, right? Sitting down, selecting a show or classes based on your goals. You might be trying to qualify for medal finals, young riders, team championships, etc. Okay, so your 3-year picture is the next piece. I think this starts to be useful in the day-to-day. Really making sure that your team, that everybody is on the same page. What does revenue look like? How have we grown in that way? What are the measurables in our business going to look like? How many people are going to be involved, right? How many offices do we have? What does our physical location look like? And everybody should really be clear on what their own role looks like here and what their 3-year plan looks like. And your team needs to agree on this. It's really important that everyone's on the same page so that you're all paddling the boat in the same direction. And then this is where I kind of start to get excited, is that 1-year plan. What should get done this year? That feels like something we can get a handle on most of the time. Less is more. Sometimes trying to get everything done at once leaves you accomplishing not very much. They suggest that you book a couple hours with your leadership team and you really sit down and establish numbers, so revenue, profit, those measurable numbers. You want to have 3 to 7 specific measurable priorities for your year. So for example, if I were working with a brand new business who came in, this would probably be my 1-year plan for them. So making sure that we secure a property to work off of with a written agreement, that we've got at least 3 or 5 lesson horses who are appropriate for the job, that we've got 3 to 5 part-time instructors. Maybe we're hiring a VA or installing some AI intelligence to book intros and get lessons on the books here. A virtual assistant? Yeah. Good question. That we have a written agreement that outlines our terms, our pricing, our conditions for our students so that we're all on the same page about how things work, that you've got Impulsion in place and you're building a website with a funnel for your subscriptions, that you have a Stripe account in place attached to Impulsion to be able to take payment, that you're marketing your lessons with a goal of adding 5 new subscriptions a month, and that you are tracking your data, both advertising metrics and your metrics within your riding school itself. So this might be what I would put into a plan for an existing business who's looking to grow from 30 to 60 lessons a week. So maybe we're hiring 2 or 3 more instructors. Maybe we're getting some new lesson horses. This is where really having those metrics, having that data is very, very important. You want to figure your cost per intro and then market that in ad spend times your total number of open intro spots per week as your weekly ad spend. And that's because if you really sit down and look at it, what costs you money is having open intro spots on the calendar where you could be teaching that student. And then at this point too, if you haven't done it already, you need to make sure that your successful intro process is documented and that you're able to train your new staff with it. You know, one of the very common bottlenecks we see is when the business owner or the business founder moves to hand off that intro process to an instructor. That's when we very often see things, you know, your conversion rates drop. And I think a large part of that is due to not having a written process that we're able to share with our staff that's going to be something they don't have to think about. Sales is something that scares a lot of people. A lot of people, if they don't have experience with it, think, oh, I'm not good at selling. And so they're thinking about making the sale. If you hand them a process, it's a different experience. And then track your data. Always track your data. And then 1 year plan example, sometimes if people come to us with coaching and they're already running, you know, say 30 to 100 lessons a week, but they're not profitable, what are our measurables? What are we going to look at for a year? So usually it'll involve doing a business blueprint or a deep dive into your finances. Sometimes the problem is as simple as really not knowing your numbers. It's not uncommon for people to not know what they're spending on the various different areas in your business. So figuring it out, what that may be, and fixing it. I think you all know, you've probably heard us say enough that it's really common for you to have too many horses. You know, if you're teaching 50 lessons a week, you don't need 25 horses. And that's it costs money to feed them, take care of them, and it's a common thing that people are too overhorsed for the number of lessons that they're teaching. Could be too much staff, could be just out of control expenses, but it's really important to do that deep dive and figure out why. So we've got to cut expenses, increase revenue, make sure that the right people and horses are on your team, and make sure you've got a schedule that makes sense. Make sure you're being efficient with your instructor's time, and then increasing ad spend and crystallizing your intro process, crystallizing all the processes involved in your business. Okay, so getting into quarterly rocks. That's what this book calls your 90-day plan. And 90 days is about the right amount of time that a human being can stay focused on something. So really, the way I like to look at this, you know, the closer you get to today, the more important. And so you've got to implement in order for change to happen. The farther out that goal is, the less likely it is to happen. So, you know, just to throw an analogy at you, if I were to say, hey, my goal is to do the meter 45 jumpers and come to you, you might say, cool, let's get around the meters first, right? Like you can have that goal. That's a great goal to have, but we need to focus in on what's closer at hand before we go running down that 3, 5, 10-year plan. So 90-day rocks. What might we do in a brand new business within 90 days? So securing a facility to work out of with a written agreement, setting up Impulsion with your website and funnels, getting a clear agreement in place for terms, condition, pricing, get at least one lesson horse, get at least one instructor, get a Stripe account, start advertising and track your data, and start using a documented curriculum. And that's a long list, but the first 90 days, I think, are the time to hustle and try to make things happen. And so I didn't go through and do this for every piece, but hopefully this gives you an idea of, if you're an already existing business, what might make sense for you depending on what your goals are. what makes sense to be able to actually do, actually accomplish within 90 days. So your issues list. Solving your issues is in proportion to your success. So you have to be able to have clear lines of communication with your staff. Chances are good that your instructors or your stable management team know what your issues are. Your clients might also know what your issues are. So ask them and solve it. And keeping in mind as you're solving your issues that you want to make all those decisions in line with your vision. That vision is something everybody should understand. The number one reason employees aren't sharing a company's vision is that they don't know it. You want to make sure that everybody's energy is in the same direction, that people are asking questions about it. And going into your rocks, right, if we're thinking about that 90-day process, you want to touch base with all your employees at least every 90 days in regards to your vision, right? So how are we doing? Are we on track? Check in on those 90-day rocks, make sure that we are moving in the right direction, that we are reaching those goals. And then talking about people, making sure that we've got the right people in the right seats. So is everybody operating in their greatest area of skill or passion? You might have somebody who is absolutely phenomenal at teaching intro lessons, at teaching kids lessons, really giving everybody great, first experiences on the horse. If you ask them to come into the office and help you with client communications, they might sink. That might not be something they're good at. It doesn't mean that they're not a good member of the team, but it means they're maybe the right person in the wrong seat. So your unique ability and the accountability chart means that they're in the right seats. And we'll look at that accountability chart in just a minute here. The right person in the wrong seat is someone who shares your values, but is not operating in their unique ability zone. The wrong person in the right seat means that what they're doing matches their skill set, but they may not share your values or the business's values. Wrong person in the wrong seat, not going to work, right? Time to move on. So this people analyzer tool. So what this is a tool to see, are these people in the right seats? Here you might have your vision up here. So these might be the values or the vision that you and your staff come up with. And you're going to go through and rank your team. Are they succeeding? Yes, absolutely. That's going to be a plus. Are they failing, not doing this? That's going to be a minus. Are we right some of the time and wrong some of the time? Plus or minus. And then this get it, want it capacity. That's what Brian sometimes refers to a little bit. You may have heard us say humble, hungry, and smart, right? Do they understand what's being asked of them? Do they want to do it? And do they have the capacity to be able to do it well? And then you have to decide what your bar is. Who do you want to surround yourself by? Is it realistic that every single person on your team has pluses in this people analyzer tool? Is it realistic that everybody has negative signs and we just need someone with a pulse here? You've got to decide what that bar is for yourself and really decide what's your minimum standard, what's your worst case scenario if you do this and you think, man, I thought my bar was going to be Maybe something like this where we might have a couple plus or minuses, but the majority, everybody's going to be a plus. If you go through and do this with your team members, if it doesn't turn out that way, what's your scenario look like? If you were to let everybody who doesn't meet that bar go, are you able to handle it until you get new staff? I can tell you that some of you have standards that are too low and some of you have standards that are too high. So, it's a balance of finding what's going to help make the team run. And this can be a useful tool in quantifying who is going to work and who do we maybe need to replace moving forward. So, talking briefly about letting staff go. I know that's something that is nobody's favorite task. And so, really understanding that sometimes the right choice for everyone is letting somebody go, as difficult as that may be. So the suggestion there, if someone's below the bar, sit down, discuss issues and expectations, give them 30 days to improve, check in with them within 30 days. If they have not improved, talk about it again, give them another 30 days. And then at the end of that 60-day period total, if we haven't improved, termination's probably the right choice, right? We've communicated, we've checked in. If we're still not meeting expectations, it's probably time to move on. So let's talk about the right seats. Who is in charge of what pieces of the business? What is the right way to structure your business moving forward? In most businesses, and horseback riding schools included, you're going to have three main areas. You're going to have sales and marketing, right? You're going to have a method of generating new business. You're going to have your operations, which is how you deliver your product, how you operate on a day-to-day. And you're going to have finance and managing that money. So usually horseback riding schools are strong on the operations side of things. Sales and marketing and finance usually could be improved on. So this is an example of an accountability chart. You might have your visionary or founder who works with a leadership team. You're going to have often an integrator. Usually that's not the same person as the visionary in the business. Sometimes it is. But they're really the ones who are making things happen in the business. And it's important for you to think about as the founder, look, it's time to start a meeting. Where do you want to be working in your business? If you really love teaching lessons, I think you should teach some lessons. It's not like you shouldn't be working in your business. If you really love having some of those hours in the morning to clean some stalls, do it. That's not wrong. But if you really don't want to be in your business, you don't want to be teaching those lessons, or you don't want to be the one answering all the emails from your staff, then we should back off and find the right team member to be able to do that for you. So this is important. When more than one person is accountable, nobody's accountable, right? That happens frequently. Oh, the working student should clean and feed those stalls. When they're done, just check and make sure that they got it done, right? Half the time they don't do it, or they don't do it right because they know they're not really accountable for it. And that's true for all positions. So whether it's stall cleaning, whether it's barn management, whether it's scheduling, especially if you have a VA or AI, fulfillment for lessons, for training, that's true across the board. So your leadership team roles, going back to that accountability chart a little bit. So the visionary is usually going to be the owner or the founder. They're the person who has 10 ideas a week. One of those ideas might be good, right? The integrator is the person who is boots on the ground who is blending all the different functions of the business together. And so your leadership team moving forward should be your visionary, your integrator, and the head of each team. So your head of your sales or marketing, your head of operations, your head of finance. People can wear multiple hats, especially when the company is still small, but that's who should be, my favorite word, should be on your leadership team. And so this is that get it, want it capacity to do it, adding to that people analyzer that we talked about. So this is an example of what an org chart might look like in a riding school. So you have the founder. They might hire that riding school director who really becomes their right-hand person and oversees stable management, lesson instructors, admin side of things. The founder usually is going to stick with the financial person and keep that kind of under their wheelhouse. You might have some cases where that's appropriate to hand off to a riding school director or potentially an admin person, but I would recommend that you keep your fingers pretty close to that as the founder. And then your stable management person and your lesson instructors and your admin people, they are all going to be involved with your horses and with your students and helping service them and make sure they are all happy and doing well. Okay, data, super important. This is really how you measure your business. This business uses a scorecard that looks like this. It's very similar to how we use our dashboard. We'll go through it a little bit. So you want to have 5 to 15 categories on your scorecard or your dashboard. You want to try to keep it as simple as possible. It's easy to start adding things because you want to start measuring everything in your business. And half of me agrees with, yes, let's measure everything so we have data. And half of me says, just keep it simple and worry about what's most important. So you got to figure out what categories we're going to be measuring, who is responsible for each category. And by that, I mean who is responsible for the number, for generating new intros, for checking that we've, cleaned all the stalls correctly, for, fill in the blank. Not the person who's necessarily entering it into that chart. What's that weekly goal? And then leave a blank space for next week. Figure out who's responsible for entering each of those numbers and then use it. Everybody who we work with in the coaching program has a dashboard. Some of us could improve on actually utilizing that dashboard, right? But we have to have numbers. We have to have data in place. Otherwise, we're kind of just talking about your feelings. And while that can be important and that can be really useful for working through a staffing issue or how to handle something, if we're trying to grow your business and get traction in your business, we have to have those numbers. So this is just hopefully something that looks familiar. We've got pieces of our dashboard here. We might have a goal that we're trying to meet. Lights are going out. And then we might have our actual numbers here of how many active subscribers we have, failed payments, actual data coming in, and then advertising metrics, incredibly important to keep track of so we know those numbers for what we should be spending each week. So using your scorecard or your dashboard, the numbers should be based weekly on activity, and it should help predict your profit and loss. We should use it as a proactive tool to correct challenges, and you can visually flag any categories that are looking like they're off track. So we're not booking intros or we're not converting intros. You can actually physically highlight that and look at it so that we can address it. Give it a whirl for at least 3 months. Don't let it be a flavor of the week. This is so important. I just can't emphasize enough how much we need the actual numbers and the actual data points in your business to be able to move forward. So what gets measured gets done. And I would encourage you to think about implementing numbers for everybody. And that leads to discipline, because it's moving through that subjective communication between the manager and the direct reports. It creates accountability. Accountable people appreciate numbers. Wrong people in the wrong seats resist. It helps create clarity and commitment in your business. Might create some friendly competition. It should help produce results, should help create teamwork, and should help all of you solve problems faster if we're looking at things that are measurable in your business. So what might you use in a writing school for some of these measurables? So definitely looking at your profit and loss. We want to make sure that our numbers are consistent or growing. You might look at your horse workload. You might look at your lesson instructor workload, how many intros are taught and converted, how many subscriptions are upgraded, downgraded, or canceled. I would also suggest that you track that by instructor so that you know if you've got a person problem or a different kind of problem. Definitely need to track your advertising metrics. So your ad spend, your intros booked, your subscriptions converted, and horse care management tracking. So I didn't get into the details of that, but how much hay are you using? How much grain are you using? How often are we cleaning the stalls? Medications, fly spray. I'm sure you all could come up with 1,000 things we could track for how we're caring for the horses. And then looking at your issues list, we're kind of going to skip this. You need to be able to solve your issues. There's going to be different types. What I will say about this is there's going to be different types of issues that come up. So is it a fundamental issue in your vision that you're not going to be solving in the next 90 days? If it's something that is a shorter time frame, let's delegate it and solve it at the department level. And the department level should be kind of local. By that I mean, hopefully your horse care team can solve an issue with the broken waterer and they don't need to come up and ask for your advice about how to best do that. This is how to solve your problems, figure out what the issue is, discuss it, solve it. I'm not going to go into that too much. 10 aspects of solving issues. Again, I think if you need help on how to work through solving issues, we can talk about it, but I think most of you probably have a pretty good handle on this. Okay, processes. I love talking about this. So, this is so important. Everything has to be consistent in your business before we can scale. So you want to document your core processes and then ensure that they're followed. We talk about this a lot when you're thinking about hiring and training your staff. We talk about documenting all the processes. And so you want to make sure that the core processes are being referred to in a similar manner. Everybody has the same terminology in your organization. And your core processes are probably going to focus around people. So HR, how you're finding people to work in your business, how you're hiring them, how you're training them. Around marketing. So how do you actually do your marketing? What do you use? Your sales process. We talked a little bit about that with intros. So how do you actually convert that intro into a subscription? Operations. How are you teaching your lesson? How are you feeding your horses? Accounting, money coming in, coming out, and customer retention. How are you actually taking care of your clients once they're there? So some of the riding school processes you might want to get on paper. Could be your SOPs. You want to have something for every major and then eventually your less major action in your business. So this can be really daunting if you don't have anything in place already. But what you can use is that 80-20 rule. So we like to recommend that you have a video for training, and then I really like if you also have something written so that your already trained staff, if they need to look something up quickly, they can just flip to a page in a manual rather than trying to pull up a video, figure out where in the video they're trying to watch it, especially if they're on shift and trying to get to something. I so much more like having something I can read rather than something I could watch. But I think when you're training your staff, nothing beats having a video so they can actually see how something is done. This is the way we clean a stall. This is how we measure our grain. Here's a video of an intro lesson. So I say do both. And then that 80-20 rule, anybody know what that means? No? So it's also known as the Pareto principle. And what it is that roughly 80% of effect comes from 20% of a cause. And so that could mean that 80% of sales come from 20% of customers, or 80% of your results are coming from 20% of your tasks. So figure out what that 20% is and start there as far as documenting your processes so that you're not just completely overwhelmed with how many things you have to document in your business. So just for example here, I worked with a client who was in process of hiring barn staff, and one of the things that she really did a good job with was she mapped out her feeding pattern for her feeders when they were dropping hay. And so when I was at the university, we did this too. It was about 85 horses. The lesson horses were in pasture. A lot of the other horses were in stalls. And so our rule was that the lesson horses got fed first and got fed last at night so that they had time to eat when on either side of their lessons in the middle of the day. And so she ended up doing something similar and drew out a map of her property and, drew the arrows. You're going to go this way in the morning and this way at night. And she actually had said that she had that staff member was living on site. She had to enter her apartment for, fix something or something, I don't know, with permission. And she said she was so happy because she looked at the refrigerator and that map was on a magnet on the refrigerator. So I think that's a really good example of, sometimes we feel like, oh, this is silly. Like, why don't they just get it? Like, how hard is it to drive around the property one direction in the morning and the other direction at night? But I think it really should underscore, have that in place, have that for your staff. Obviously, it was something that this staff member really appreciated and, looked at every day. So traction, right? Starting to wrap it up here. So action is the process of doing. And getting traction means making your vision a reality. And so bringing discipline and accountability to the organization through the methods that we've talked about here, making sure everybody is setting specific and measurable priorities. It allows you to meet these challenges better as an organization. Going back to rocks, if you do nothing else, I would say set rocks, the 3 to 7 most important priorities for your company for the next 90 days. It's a time frame we can focus on and help stop you from focusing on trying to do everything all at once. Some rocks you might put into your riding school, 10% or less in terms of client churn, 10% or more in terms of client upgrades, 15 new students, $150 cost per subscription based on your advertising metrics. Individually, You might set something like an instructor will close 3 intros. They might upgrade 2 clients. They might ride 3 lesson horses a week for some schooling rides. Those are all measurable and potentially realistic depending on how many days a week your instructor is working. And every member in your business should have some sort of rocks there. So again, I'm not going to go through how to establish it. I think you guys can figure that out. If they're not achieved, you have some options. Do we carry it forward to next quarter? If it's mostly done, can we shift it to a departmental to-do list, or do we reassign it to somebody else? And then meeting cadence, making sure that we are communicating with our staff members, especially about the rocks for themselves and the rocks for the organization as a whole. So we want to have well-run meetings. I don't get too crazy about what that cadence really is, but you should be meeting, somebody should be having one-on-ones probably weekly or bi-weekly with everybody in your business. You should be having whole team and departmental meetings at least once a month, if not more than that. Your leadership team should be meeting at least once a quarter to check in on all these things. Your meeting agenda, reviewing what's going on, reviewing the vision, establishing the rocks for next quarter, looking at issues, next steps, and concluding. So, everybody, if we were rating meetings, it should be an 8+ out of 10. So think about that when conducting meetings. Make sure that you meet even if things are going well. It can be really tempting to skive off of that, but we want to make sure that you're still communicating. You might be surprised what comes up in a meeting you didn't think you needed. You want to be doing annual planning once a year with your leadership team, and every member of the team should be getting personal feedback about their strengths and abilities and what they could improve upon as well. That helps people moving forward. So thank you all for listening, and that's it.